It's 2:04 and Hannah's waiting up there nicely. All right, I'd like to call the meeting of the Funding Review Advisory Committee to order. Thank you for joining us today, and to all the committee members for your ongoing presence and dedication to this time. I'd like to give a little bit of context to today's meeting. This afternoon's meeting is dedicated to the human services sector. We know that's a broad, complex, and essential sector to our community's well-being. It includes a diverse network of organizations and programs that address people's basic needs, strengthen families, and foster opportunity. As we all know, the sector is currently navigating an increasingly challenging and dynamic funding environment. And so I want to thank everybody behind me who I believe is involved in some way in the human services sector. So thank you for everything that you all are doing. For our purposes today, we're going to be touching on the sector represented by a couple of individuals who are going to share some information with us today. We know that this is a wide range of programs that are designed to support and help individuals and families meet essential needs and improve the quality of life. This encompasses services such as housing and homelessness prevention, food assistance, health care and behavioral health, workforce development, services for older adults, support for people with disabilities, and programs serving children, youth, and families. These sectors touch nearly every resident in our community at some point in their lives and plays a critical role in ensuring our community is safe, healthy, and thriving. Understanding the current landscape, investment priorities, and challenges facing human services providers is essential to our work here today. These insights will help shape our recommendations to ensure sustainable, effective, and equitable support for the sector in the years ahead. Today, we are fortunate to hear from two leaders who bring in valuable perspectives, one who will speak to the city's approach on the work and investment in the sector, and another representing a broader network of human service providers across our region. We are joined by Hannah Jones, Deputy Director of Community Development with the city's Department of Development, and shortly thereafter, Michael Corey, Executive Director of the Human Service Chamber of Franklin County. Thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate it. And Hannah, I am going to go ahead and turn things over to you for your presentation from the city's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Had to make sure I had that on silent before I get in trouble. All right. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. The city has invested in the human services sector for decades. However, that investment has evolved over the years and is marked by several milestones. The first and perhaps the most significant was the convening of the original FRAC committee, resulting in the city's commitment to allocate a portion of the motel bed tax to the human services sector. With the creation of the set-aside, the city encouraged the sector to create a unified advocacy voice, which ultimately became the Human Services Chamber and everyone in this audience today, and set out to establish a more equitable granting process, not only to increase access for organizations, but to ensure that the funding amounts awarded were in line with what was needed to sustain programming. Prior to this, grants to organizations had traditionally been legacy-based and non-competitive, favoring those who were able to successfully advocate at City Hall. The city awarded its first round of competitive grants in 2015, followed by two subsequent rounds in 2017 and 2019. However, the pandemic caused us to pause and reset our focus. And in 2021, we did not do a new funding cycle, but instead utilized ARPA funding to undertake a separate grant effort to assist organizations who are struggling to remain operational and serve the ever-growing need in our community as a result. The recommendations from the Recovery and Resilience Committee provided valuable feedback for us as we look to restart our grant process. A recommendation that the city increase its commitment to the sector to match the increased needs post-pandemic, from our traditional allocation of $5 million to the $10 million annually that we have started. Moving to a longer 3-year grant cycle for sustainability planning for our partners, and the need for more flexible operational grants. And in alignment with the housing strategy for the 2023 and 2026 rounds, we began to refine our focus areas to ensure that we were targeting the resources to organizations addressing the challenges of housing and economic stability. While my presentation focuses on the funding from the bed tax that the Department of Development deploys, it is important to acknowledge the overall investment by the city in our partners and the programming they provide to help families stabilize, experience economic opportunity, and sustain safe and inclusive neighborhoods within Columbus, much of which Sandy spoke to at the beginning in her opening comments. As you can see, the bed tax is a minor piece of the funding equation, which made us ask, as we move forward in a post-pandemic, ever-changing landscape, how can we utilize our funding to unlock additional programmatic funding that can be invested in our residents? The first way we did this was by reframing the profile of who we want to reach. As you heard from Deputy Director Prosser, the housing shortage is causing the cost of living for families to skyrocket. And from Executive Director Isom, that for some, this creates an insurmountable financial challenge that leaves some residents with no options, housing options, even when employed. Almost all of the 20 most common jobs in our state do not pay enough to allow residents to survive in a way that leads to stability. These are the Alice households: asset limited, income constrained, and employed. Residents who are doing all they can to close a gap that continues to widen and shift beneath them. In Franklin County, since 2010 and the last convening of the FRAC, the number of households that fall under the ALICE threshold has grown by 41%. Here, a family of 4 with 2 children in childcare needs to make $90,000 a year per year just to break even, just to keep their heads above water. And at least $147,000 per year in order to move towards stability and weather unanticipated financial challenges. Each item listed on the budget before you represents a service or program offered by the human services sector. If we can invest in them and their work, then hopefully they can help those families reduce the cost, close the gap, and start to build a solid foundation. The second approach we have taken is to embrace trust and get out of the way. Sometimes it isn't about building the perfect program or finding just the right sustainability model. Sometimes the most direct and efficient way to offer assistance is just to give the household support, no strings attached, and let them determine the right intervention for their unique situation. Beginning this year, 5 nonprofit partners are enrolling 200 eligible participants into the Economic Mobility Accelerator Initiative, as well as their respective workforce readiness and education programs. This initiative focuses on ALICE households. These residents are at a risk of falling off a benefit cliff, which occurs when a small increase in earnings results in the sudden and often unexpected decrease in public benefits. Losing such essential benefits often hinders career progression and economic mobility opportunities. The majority of the current participants are receiving some level of federal benefit that we know will be facing cuts, which you can see on the slide to my right. So it's probably, yeah. While the program was not created with these cutbacks in mind, it underscores the precarious position these families are in and the importance of access to sustained, flexible, unrestricted assistance in order to empower our residents to continue pursuing their goals. Our investment in the Accelerator program is not simply about supplementing stagnant wage growth or just about proving the theory of direct cash assistance. It is focused on jumpstarting an infrastructure that partners and funders can plug into. To take a finite amount of funding and create a scalable and replicable model our partners can utilize to embed the intervention in their current and future programming without having to create something completely new. The principle of trust-based investment holds true with our Elevate grantees as well. After the pandemic, we moved away from programmatic funding and towards flexible operational support that can be used by the organizations in the manner they deem appropriate in order to best accomplish their mission. Our investment in the sector's sustainability is also reflected in the capacity building services we are providing through the Accelerate program, which is expanding to include not-for-profits, as they are employers and in some cases entrepreneurs as well, and essential to the city's prosperity. Although the county could not be here to present, I want to acknowledge Ken is here and others and acknowledge their role and the collaboration we have had with them as we have navigated this new environment. It will be critical to our region's success that we continue to identify local and regional opportunities to invest in our residents, and that we approach that investment with a willingness to adapt, change, and respond in real time to what our community tells us they need in order to access economic opportunity and stability. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
We have a moment if you do want to take a question here, if anyone's got anything burning.
This is not a question for me really, but just, would you be able to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing from the changes that we've made to the way that we're awarding grants, elongating the cycles for 3 years, looking at the operational support, and just talk a little bit, if you feel like that has had a positive impact, what sort of impacts you've seen by us taking that sort of trust-based philanthropy approach.
Sure. So I would hope that at the very least it creates less administrative burden on some level. Of course, obviously, there are parameters to what local government funding can be used for, but not requiring that it be closely tied to a specific program. Hopefully, number one, removes this administrative barrier, and number two, allows organizations to be able to fund some of the things that are a challenge but are essential to services. I would welcome the feedback of Michael when he's up here and others as to what they see day to day. I think moving to a 3-year cycle was also very helpful. 2 years was better than 1, but still not quite enough to be able to plan how to program. So that gives more time also to determine new funding sources if you don't anticipate being successful in the next round too.
So I have a question for you, sorry, that is a little bit subjective. So I'm not looking for numbers, but I'm curious if you could share an opinion or an experience a little bit about the magnitude of asks that come to the city versus ability to be able to meet every ask. Is that something that's fair to get your opinion on?
So I would say in an average year, when we were doing $5 million in funding, we would get about $24 million in requests. I believe we just closed the 2026 round and we got about $47 million in requests. And that is taking into consideration that we don't fund each organization at nearly the same level. So the trade-off of not doing programmatic is we were funding fewer organizations, but for a lot more money because we were fully funding an entire program. What we can do now is serve more organizations, but we've capped how much they can access. So it is definitely a need that is out there and continues to grow and change.
Well, you gave me numbers, thank you. Okay, so in order to keep us on track, I'm going to invite Michael Corey to join you at the table if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your presentation. So Michael's going to share a sector-wide perspective that's informed by the experiences, insights, and expertise of more than 200 nonprofit and community-based organizations that are represented by the Human Service Chamber. These organizations collectively provide a wide range of services seeking to address community needs, and Michael's representing that membership. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Deputy Director Jones. I'm sorry you have to sit next to me for this. As ever, you and the city are being humble. The city routes grants through Columbus Public Health, through COAAA, through Rec and Parks, for summer meals, for community violence. Those are all competitive grant processes as far as I know. And I want to note for the record, as I have done in this building several times, when COVID hit, the federal government didn't specify how the CARES Act dollars were to be spent. And the city listened to a lot of my bosses in the room, as did the county, and they allocated $20 million that moved fast in 2020, $15 million from the city and $5 million from the county. That was a lifeline along with some other elements. So you and your team did a great job, and I'm glad we get to sit next to each other today. So my name is Michael Corey. Forgive the jitters. This is my 12th cup of coffee today. We've got a sick 1-year-old at home, so he's not sleeping, so I'm not sleeping. So people are feeding me caffeine, so forgive that. Before I jump in, I just want to say how special it is to be in this room with all these wonderful people behind you and on the screen. I feel like I have the best job in the world, trying to help the helpers, and I have a wonderful team that I'll acknowledge in a moment here. The crux of what I want to get across today is that there is a supply and demand challenge, supply of resources to help meet a growing demand, but this community can be the leading community across the United States to figure this out. If you remember nothing else, know that. We have a chance to turn these challenges into opportunities, no matter how significant the challenges are. So we're here today to talk about the state of the sector. I'm really privileged to be here to try and do that, and I'll see if I can get this to work. Great. The Human Service Chamber, as you kindly noted, is essentially a chamber of commerce for 220 plus health and human services nonprofits in Columbus and Franklin County. We are one of 3 that we are aware of across the United States, one in Cincinnati that came after us, and one in Cleveland that just started. And our job is to help these organizations navigate all the challenges that they've got. We'll get into the diversity of that work in a moment. We were founded by some of the people in this room, and it's been my pleasure over 8 years to see the partnerships that make this community run, driven by the nonprofits, get stronger and stronger and stronger. But for nonprofits, the Columbus region isn't the place that it is. But nonprofits can't do the work they need to do without this community too. We're really privileged to be at the nexus of this and in partnership with a lot of the folks around this table, and certainly everybody in this room to figure out the community needs that we've got. And this is my wonderful team. They're incredible. Thank you for everything that you've done to help us forward today. Okay. You have a little bit of a sense of what HHS nonprofits are, but it's such a diverse array of services and organizations, some extremely large, some extremely small, some very complex business models, some very straightforward, some locally based entities, some that are part of national entities, some national nonprofits based here, and some that have been around for over a century, a surprising number actually, and some that are new within the last couple of years. And they all create this tapestry of organizations meeting a wide range of community needs independently and in conjunction with one another, with sophisticated business models, complex business streams, and this united devotion to making the community better. There are a lot of organizations that kind of fit neatly within the social determinants of health, which is what you see before you. And there are a lot that are kind of on the periphery, a lot that are in multiple of them. We've tried categorizing the work that our members do, and it drives our members nuts because, like, well, I do those 3 things. You have to list all of it. And that's part of the fun of this, too. It's a really diverse array of organizations led by very diverse people serving a very diverse array of this community. And I think that's a key part of this that often gets lost. It's not just the work, it's not just the impact that comes from them, it's the humanity that undergirds all of it. It's a really beautiful thing that they get to prioritize the people that they're employing and serving. Our members, as I noted, are diverse in size. This gives you a sense of how our membership exists currently just by revenue. The bulk of our members are small, which reflects national data on nonprofits that are out there, that are health and human services nonprofits. This has evolved. When COVID hit, we had about 80 member organizations. They trended toward the larger size revenue-wise, and then COVID hit, and we started adding about 30 members a year, and they tended toward the smaller size. But again, it's that collective, which is a really interesting piece of this. In the aggregate, they generate over $2 billion in annual revenue for this community, with over $2 billion in annual economic impact. $2 billion in annual economic impact. It's an economic engine just as much as it is a key piece, if not the foundational piece of the safety net. It employs over 22,000 people just within our membership, and they serve hundreds of thousands. It's impossible to quantify that with the information that we've got. I also wanted to show this off. Poverty in Franklin County has evolved over the last 30, 40 years. It used to be very predictable as to where poor people were going to be living and even what their demographics were. And if you've heard Michael Wilkos talk about this, you've gotten the voluminous understanding of how that has been and how that's evolved. That now is fanned out into our suburbs, into the outer parts of Franklin County, just as much as it remains entrenched in areas where it's traditionally been. And our members, and these are just the HQs, are fanned out across the county as well, although you can see clear concentrations in parts of the community. I always think this is a really interesting element of this, but note, this is not reflective of every facility that our nonprofits operate. And it's certainly not reflective of a lot of the changes of late as nonprofits have innovated in getting out into the community as COVID emerged in particular to meet people where they are. But this gives you at least a geographic sense of where nonprofit organizations are right now. Okay, let's start with where this can go and the ambitious vision of what a high-functioning health and human services ecosystem of nonprofits, in partnership with all the key partners, local government, hospitals, philanthropy, business, et cetera, what it could look like. And it could be really something. And it would basically mean this community would be a lot better. We'd be addressing our inequities. We'd be creating opportunities. We'd be able to move people in and out of systems of need faster and better and more effectively. That's where this could go. That's where we want this to be. That is what everyone is here to strive for, to essentially go out of business. As Matt Habash is famous for seeing at the Mid-Ohio Food Collective. He's been there for about 80 years, I think, at the Food Collective. And that's still the goal. It's the goal in every city across the United States, is to figure that out. And this lovely graphic kind of gives you a sense of how people do navigate it. They don't just go to one organization for help. They don't just stay in the nonprofit sector for help. There are multiple systems where people are moving back and forth and around and back again, getting the assistance that they need. It can be just one family that touches on multiple agencies to get the support they need to get back on their feet, whatever the case may be. There we go. I don't want to read to you, as you've deduced, but this excerpt from a brand new report from Columbus Public Health, I think, is a very lovely way of encapsulating what a utopian HHS system could be like and the consequences it could have for the community, which is to say it's a safer, better place. At the end of the day, that's what we're looking for everybody that lives here. And we have systems that are pretty damn good in this community. This isn't just an impossibility that we can't reach. We have the best library system in the United States. We have an incredible array of health systems that work in conjunction with one another. We have now made investments in LinkUs and CODA through what we've done over the last year that are going to have enormously good effects for all of us. We have an incredible zoo, and the zoo system, I think they let me say that with 2 organizations that they operate. And now we're investing in our inland port through Rickenbacker and through the new Columbus, I keep calling it Port Columbus, it's Glenn Airport now. These incredible things that we're doing, the systems that are well-funded are operating at that highest level, showing the rest of the country how to do it. We can do that in our system too. We can do it. Okay, we're not there yet. We have the wonderful problem, the normal problem, that the region is booming. And nonprofits have been responding to that commensurate with the community's growth as proportionally and as quickly and efficiently as they can, but it's very hard. And we've seen that nonprofits haven't been able to keep up with meeting that need. Even if the proportion of people in need is unchanged, the number of people in need has grown, and we haven't been able to respond proportionally with dollars or in services provided. So nonprofits need help, independent of what's happening in Washington, which we'll talk about, I promise, this was going to be a challenging year because all those ARPA dollars that have been so thoughtfully utilized here are drying up or have dried up. And every city across the country was going to have to figure that out this year. We knew it was going to be tough. That's a good expected problem, even as it was a substantial one. But there are other things that are abnormal, that are intentional challenges that are forthcoming, as opposed to the incidental ones that we need to be addressing. This little data point gives you a sense of our community's priorities on health. This was published by the Central Ohio Hospital Council and Franklin County Public Health just a few weeks or months ago. It all runs together from the Health Map. These are the kinds of things that our organizations are so invested in. We need help because that proportion of people in need is going up, even if our poverty rates have remained very similar over time. That ALICE rate that Deputy Director Jones talked about, look at that increase. It's substantial. And there's the abnormal stuff that we'll talk about in greater length too. This White House, this Congress is making life very, very challenging for nonprofits. Okay. We asked our members a lot of questions about the state of things right now. I'm going to walk you through some of the data points. We have more detail about this available for you through a wonderful tool we've created online, but I wanted to talk you through a few of them right now. We've asked our members earlier this summer, what do you think the state of the nonprofit sector is? And we had a more vulgar word for very bad, and a lot of them chose it. I've never seen responses this high. And like so many of these data points, it's consistent with what we're seeing in national reports and from partners across the United States. It's not good. It's tough. How has demand for services changed just since January? It's up 72%. 72% since January. That is an enormous figure to happen on a short timeline. And again, this is consistent with data we just saw from our friends at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. 75% of their members report an increase just since January on demand. The part that really troubles me, and I think will trouble all of you, is this one, though. Today, before a lot of the federal things have hit, a vast majority of our members can't meet the current demand. Now, this figure has been going up ever since 2020, when we started asking this question of our members. This is the highest it has ever been. This is a product of a lot of things. It's a product of some of the normal stuff, like our growth, and it's a product of some of the abnormal stuff, like what's happening in Washington and even in the State House. We've been asking about workforce issues for several years as well. These numbers are actually better than they have been in recent years. It's harder for only 37% of our members to hire and retain talent compared to January. That number used to be in the 50s and 60s earlier this decade. So improvement, but still not great. Not great. And as elemental as people are to this work, we're not going to replace everybody with AI. This is not something that we can be satisfied with. What is the primary impediment to recruiting? No surprises here. These are consistent year to year and across the United States. Wages and benefits, finding qualified staff, funding uncertainty has increased as a driver of this of late. Operational costs. This increase since January is considerable too. This is one of the driving factors that's weighing down a lot of organizations right now as they try to figure things out and meeting that demand. And they're not expecting it to get better. Now, when we ask why, wages is the predominant cause of this expectation. Wage growth and demands on wage has been substantial. And I think the last data point we got on this was last year. Something like 95% of our members increased wages and benefits from March of 2020 to last year. That's not going to stop, but the math is getting harder and harder to meet. Wages, we talked about that. I forgot that I put a slide in there for you. Are you expecting a deficit? Now, this is a tricky question to get accurate answers on because an agency might be expecting a deficit today, but they're going to do something about it by the end of the year. They may not end the year in a deficit, but when we asked this question, to give you that point in time, 54% said, we're expecting a deficit. we are at the Human Service Chamber, but we're going to do something about it too before year's end. That's not a very promising note, but it gives you that illustration of some of the challenges the sector is facing financially too. Now, this was really onerous for our members to share with us, but really valuable information to get. You all wanted to know about where revenue was coming from to make up those complex budgets we were talking about in health and human services nonprofits, whether they're a very large FQHC or whether they're a very small nonprofit that employs one person. This gives you a sense, based upon the data we got out of our survey, of the diversity of the revenue streams that nonprofits pull in and work with. But I really wanted to highlight the trend lines since 2018. And I know this is small, but again, you have this in your written report as well. The ones that I wanted to flag, individual donor gifts as a percentage have decreased steadily since 2018, before the world changed. Fee-for-service has also decreased during that timeline. Local government grants has oscillated, as you would expect with the CARES and ARPA dollars. Federal government grants have done the same, although they are at a higher level than they were in 2018. And Medicaid reimbursement has ticked up to 7.6%. That's ominous given the cuts coming to Medicaid, but we'll talk about that too. But I really love this data point, or these data points, because we've never seen them before, we've never collected them before. And this is something that will burden our members with sharing with us in the future. But watching how this evolves in the next 12 months, I think is going to be terribly instructive as everything shifts. Okay, let's get into that. The elephant in the room. Is that the phrase, elephant in the room? So before I dive in, let me say I've been accused by many of being the nattering nabob of negativity. And I've been told to, well, how many of you remember the movie Robin Hood Men in Tights? Dating myself a little bit. You never thought that I'd be testifying about Robin Hood Men in Tights. In that movie, the sheriff of Nottingham goes to tell the interlocutor that's sitting on the throne, I've got some bad news. And Richard Lewis plays the evil brother, the Ohio State grad. And he's like, I'm tired of bad news. Why don't you tell it to me better? So my job is to tell you bad news better today. It's an existential challenge for nonprofits. That's what we're facing. This is the intentional stuff that's making life so difficult for nonprofits right now. Okay. We've been talking about this since about January 21st. So forgive me if you've heard it, but it's evolved a little bit as we've seen some of them come to fruition. There are 5 key ways in which the White House and Congress are making life very, very difficult for health and human services nonprofits right now. The first are their attacks on existing and future federal grants. This started in a leaked story in the Washington Post on January 27th, where they wanted to block all active federal grants and do an assessment to ensure that they were consistent with the administration's order on diversity, equity, inclusion, and some other things. Long story short, that got blocked in court, but the Supreme Court has given them a lane to go back and do that. And the end of last week, an executive order was issued on federal grants that indicates that's the path they're going down right now. It is impossible to quantify how much money will be lost just on federal grants to nonprofits and to partners in local government and elsewhere, just through this action and just through this shift of priorities. The federal government has been funding nonprofits with grants since President Johnson's War on Poverty. We're rapidly going back to a pre-war on poverty approach to how the federal government funds nonprofits through grants. As soon as we have more specificity on how much money is being lost, we will happily share it with this committee. This is a very dynamic situation. Auditor Kilgore, and we know our friends at the county too, have been tracking this as best they can, but so much is in flux, day to day. What's going to be attacked now? Just last week, 2 of our members said, we got notice that they're putting our money on pause. So it's tough, but we're going to try to get more specifics for you there, but it's a holy cow amount of money just in that alone. The second are through budget cuts. You've seen this through what we call the big bad bill. It cut $1 trillion in Medicaid and $185 billion in SNAP over the coming years, that will have an enormous effect. And the good news is there was an attempt to make even more draconian cuts to Medicaid, and fortunately, through advocacy, that got squelched. They're not going to stop going after it. We just got through year one with $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and $185 billion in SNAP, moving costs that are impossible for states to manage alone unless they move a lot of money around and change priorities. And in Ohio, it's difficult to imagine that will happen. There are lots of other big social safety net programs that are going to be under the gun, so to speak, in the coming weeks and months in housing and childcare. Something as specific as utilities support through the HEAP program, if you're familiar with that. 2 of our members are in that space. The president's budget zeroed those dollars out. There are fights up and down in the federal budget to support nonprofits. The third is the dismantling, or I would even say weaponization, of federal agencies that are being turned on their head and what they do. Our organizations have to work, if not closely with federal agencies because they get dollars from them, but adhering to the information coming out of them or following the guidance that they put out. That is all changing very, very rapidly. What's happening at the Department of Health and Human Services alone is deeply challenging. Deeply challenging. Good luck doing public health work when people aren't getting vaccinated. It's an enormous challenge. Fourth, there are so many targeted executive orders going right after nonprofits. Can't even begin to get into all of them. But the one that affected everybody right out of the gate was the executive order on DEI. We've got one member that changed their name because they were concerned, because of the threats of prosecution and just being in the public light and being in violation of this administration's priorities in that space. That's just one sliver of this. There are so many other elements, and as I noted, there was an executive order just last week on federal grants that will have an enormous effect. We haven't even had a chance to dive into it yet. That's the landscape that we're in. And then lastly, as if we needed one more thing, there's a disproportionate effect on nonprofits with this administration's economic policies. One of the questions you all asked was, tell us what the nonprofit needs are going to be in 10 years. And while we have guesses, if the Federal Reserve can't predict a month out what's going to happen, nonprofits can't. It's a very, very uncertain environment. And I chatted yesterday with the Central Ohio Hospital Council CEO about some of this stuff, and he said, we're just as in flux as everybody else. We're trying to make forecasts on what the Medicaid cuts will be on our hospitals. We're trying to get a sense of what the tariffs are going to be and their effect on our work. We're all going through it. We're all going through it, but it's a disproportionate effect on our folks because as the economy wavers, where does demand go up? Nonprofits. Just as the dollars are going away. Supply and demand. I told you I was fun at parties. The other piece, and this is the good problem, we're responding to growth here. And we are awaiting a report that I noted in the written report to you all from the wonderful Dr. Bill Lafayette that kind of looks at the community's growth and nonprofit service needs accordingly. He's projecting another 83,000 people just at 200% of FPL by 2050. That's a lot of people. Gets back to that. Even if the proportion of people in need is flat or improves, that number of people that we have to figure out how to help is going to keep going up. Okay. We know we can get through this. It's going to be very hard. And all the conversations we've had with folks here and across the country trying to prepare for you all and your work, your critical work in figuring out how we can respond, a couple of things were clear. And one of them was that this is a national challenge that will have local solutions. But they won't be happening all by themselves. They won't be happening in an echo chamber. Communities are going to have to work together to figure this out and respond as the infrastructure changes, because that's the only way. We can't control what we can't control. We can control, though, what we do here and now. And as we talk to cities across the country about their existing streams of revenue and how they're available for competitive nonprofit grants and so on and so forth. We talked to Harvard Business School. We talked to the National Council of Nonprofits. My colleague Lauren Sands was on the phone talking to like a dozen cities. We're all just kind of like, we don't know yet. And we have a leg up here because you all are at this table. You're going to give us some tools faster than other communities are going to have them to act on. And that doesn't mean this is the only solution. We have lots of arrows in our quiver. We're all going to have to evolve, but a lot of people want to work together to figure this out. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I want to note, too, there are all sorts of things that nonprofits have been doing for years to be as nimble and agile as possible to meet community needs in a tougher and tougher funding environment. There isn't a grantor out there that hasn't had the same kind of proportions that Deputy Director Jones mentioned. So nonprofits have to evolve, and what have they done? They've become extremely lean and extremely efficient. They've embraced technologies, they've embraced collaborations, working with fellow nonprofits and with for-profit and philanthropic entities. They're doing all sorts of interesting things with the libraries and with MORPC and with health systems, with schools, with anybody that will work together to figure stuff out. And we've been really proud to be part of those efforts too, in partnership with the city and others, in trying to figure this all out together as fast and as well as we can. I know there's a lot of interest in mergers and how that's part of the equation here. Let me just note here first. In my first couple years in this job, 2017 to 2020, before the pandemic hit, there was about one merger a year in the sector. In 2020 through about 2023, there weren't any because resources were so available in helping nonprofits stay afloat while meeting community needs. Last year, there were 4. And there are several organizations talking through things as we speak. One merger is not quite official. It's one of the tools in the toolkit, but we're not going to merge our way through this problem. There's no way. You don't save enough money and you don't quell the community needs through that. But it is absolutely one of the things that nonprofits are certainly aware of. And we asked our members, how many of you are contemplating that now? And a quarter of them, at the very least, are contemplating it now. We haven't asked that question before. I can't imagine it's ever been that high. But I want to reinforce that's not going to be the solution. It will be one of the things, one of the many things nonprofits continue to do to navigate everything. Okay. We're here, though, because you have the impossible, that critical opportunity to generate ideas of how we can create dollars, not only for our sector, but for 2 other wonderful sectors in this community. And you may have seen in the report, if you read all 9 pages, I'm sorry, I'm a little worried, I'm a former lawyer. There are all sorts of ways that we've identified, that we've seen, that we've heard about to generate revenue. Some of them are small and fast and shovel-ready, and we need you all to recommend some of those. And some of them are big and substantial and will take a lot of time and complexity to pull off, like a Health and Human Services levy. We want to reinforce that we think there's a unique opportunity for this community to tap into ways to figure this out from a revenue perspective through our mayor's leadership on the National Mayors Alliance and through our county's representation in the National Association of County Organizations. What great opportunities to cultivate ideas with one another, as cities and counties are going to be the laboratories of figuring this out so we can invest in infrastructure. We did, fortunately, have a commissioned report from a company called Cohere. We don't have the final report yet, but they happily for us made some recommendations on how to bolster the sector through what's happening. And they didn't get into the how to generate revenue, they got into how much. And they talk about doing it in phases, immediate, midterm, long-term. You can look at this in detail later. Again, we'll share the full report when it's done, but they even put specific figures on how much we could invest in different areas to bolster the sector and encourage and cultivate the work that we need to do to make that visionary reality for nonprofits and that health and human services ecosystem possible. And that doesn't mean it all has to happen right away. That is what they're phasing in. This is one of, I'm sure, many other ideas that are out there, but we were happy to be able to share this from a third-party entity kind of looking at things. And as I always joke with Deputy Director Jones and your colleagues and with our friends at the county too, I just want you all to have more money to be able to allocate to meet these community needs with the partners that are in the room behind you. So I will stop yammering there, and I look forward to your questions, but I just want to reinforce how grateful I am for the people in this room, the people that are watching online, that are doing the work, and for the partners that make it possible. This is, I think, the most wonderful community in the country, and that's why I think we can do so much better. And I'm excited for that. Despite the challenges that are in front of us, we can turn those into opportunities, and thank you for the chance to speak today.
Thank you very much. I imagine there are a number of questions that may take a moment to gel. I'm going to start with one, if that's okay, while you guys think about what you want to ask. So you started to touch on something that I was going to ask you, and this is tough. So I actually think you have an audience of people that really care about this issue here. Most of us serve or have served in some capacity in a number of nonprofits in the community and understand the challenge. A lot of us are also funders corporately, individually, so I think everything that you've said is going to resonate with everyone, so thank you for sharing it as concisely as you did. Here's my question, and it's a tough one. You started to allude to it, so put yourself in our shoes. Anything we recommend is going to be getting into the pockets of partly the people we're talking about serving as well, which is, for me, a Pandora's box. I'm just speaking for myself right now. We know that no matter what we recommend, money has to come from somewhere. And that means either impacts to our residents, impacts to visitors, impacts to both. I'm curious about your opinion on whether you see something obvious that you're willing to share. And if not, that's okay, because it is a tough question. It's the one we're facing. I consider this collaboration, though, so I'm asking you not to put you on the spot. I'm asking you because I think your opinion is valued. So if you have anything that you'd say, boy, I think we could go after X, Y, or Z, I'd be curious what it is, number one. Number two, how do we sell that to our community who already feels somewhat overburdened?
Yeah. Well, the latter is a political question, and I will defer to the elected officials who are expert in that. But I do think whatever are the solutions that we as a community choose, we're going to have to push for them together and stack hands to get that done, just as we've done with other significant investments in infrastructure, just like we've done for Link Us last year, just like we've done for the libraries and for Columbus State. That's what we have to do. We have to be collaborative in approaching it, while acknowledging the challenges and not wanting to have regressive approaches to this. We want to be progressive about navigating this and generating the funds to help people. We don't want to help them on one end while hurting them on the other. We've seen some examples of that just in the legislation that passed in Washington. We're going to give people a child tax credit, but we're also going to take away their Medicaid and SNAP. We're going to give rural hospitals $50 billion, but we're going to take away much more than that through Medicaid cuts. We don't want to do that, absolutely. That's a nice way of buying myself some time to say, I don't have a laundry list of this is the immediate stuff I know we can do because, in fairness, I don't have a voluminous understanding of what is legally feasible at this moment with the state legislature and some of their home rule pieces. In fact, I spoke with an expert who is a national nonprofit law expert about what would you recommend, and it's the same laundry list of taxes and fees that were identified, for example, in the original FRAC report, but with the acknowledgement of the changes in the state legislature might have affected some of those pieces. I think there are some really interesting opportunities, not necessarily with strictly public dollars, but there's a $1 billion revenue stream now with marijuana dollars. What are we going to do with that? We don't have unilateral say. There are lots of other approaches that I think are going to be interesting as we reprioritize where we've planned to put dollars. I think that's an imperative element of this. It's not fun to talk about, but given the scale and scope of what's changing, I think that has to be on the table. Challenging too. but I think that has to be one of the ready-made solutions. Again, one of the arrows in the quiver. And I think that there are some interesting things percolating outside of the public sector too. I don't want to run afoul of that, but for example, the Columbus Chamber of Commerce just launched a 1% pledge for all of its members to give to charity every year, give to nonprofits every year. The legislation that passed, as you heard from Laura McDonald, is going to disincentivize corporate giving, as our community can lean into that despite some of those legal pieces, I think is an interesting opportunity too. All that said, I know that there are public finance experts eager to engage with this committee and help you cultivate ideas and work with the city and the county long after this year to figure out what we can do. And I think that, again, city and county partners across the country will be eager to work together because everyone's going to be asking these same questions.
Could I speak briefly to the second question, Sandy? I think that transparency and honesty is probably the essential part of the community engagement strategy. There will be groups and populations that have to be served over others. And I think our ability to convey the why and to not pretend that we will somehow meet every need is just going to be essential on the front end. The second thing I would say is that it's how we discuss prevention and diversion over emergency room. The same argument that is made in the healthcare field, in the medical field, and in others, and is very true in the housing sphere, and there's so much overlap here in the homelessness system of just, if it is constantly just funding shelter and not funding shelter and getting upstream or investing in those upstream measures, then it's always going to be harder to be able to slow down the snowball that's already rolling downhill. And I think that the plus and minus of us being not a coastal city and not the first to experience this is there is a lot to learn from. There are a lot of mistakes or learning curves that happened that we don't have to run afoul of. And so, you know, when we as a community are saying we need a 1-to-1 housing to job ratio, that's not just because every person deserves a home. It's because if we don't have that, then there's all of these other costs, and no funding source is ever going to be able to right-size all of that.
Thank you, Deputy Director Jones. Proactive and reactive investments are the way you navigate it. And I think there are chances to be more and more proactive while still being reactive. I'm not in my position going to, it's like picking my favorite child. I don't have one. I want the sector to find the resources it needs to meet the challenges that exist. But certainly no one is under the impression that the city and county alone or any one entity can meet what's going to be lost from the federal investments, for example.
Thank you. Doug and then Barbara.
First of all, thank you both for being here and for your service and to the community. It goes without saying that our community is only as great as these organizations and the people that you serve. So thank you. Couple of questions. So as you mentioned, we're planning for a decade or more. And so while we're living in this moment, in this existential crisis, as you described, we have to anticipate what the needs might be 3, 5, 10 years from now. One of the things that I've observed that I'd ask you to comment on is turnover and sort of how that's changed since the pandemic. And so how do we prepare the workforce that we're going to need in this sector for the next decade or beyond?
Yeah. What a fun and terrifying question, Doug. So if you haven't heard me say this before this year, the number of our organizations that had a change at the CEO or ED level just since February 2020 was something like 80 organizations out of now 220 plus. Since January, just at the CEO ED spot, there's been 20 organizations with a change, including some new ones that have happened just this week. And that's just the CEO ED spot. Within senior management, middle management, and entry level, there's significant turnover too. There were some really interesting investments that happened with some pandemic dollars to bolster the, for example, childcare workforce or mental health workforce. I'd be lying to you if I said I knew where those dollars were going to go in the future and if they would continue flowing. I think that'll be one of the interesting elements of that. But one of the things that, for example, we've tried to do with partners is generate more and more opportunities for our members to get continuing learning up and down their staff through partners in higher education, through the private sector, with and without government and philanthropic dollars. I think things like that are going to continue percolating. But the need to continue ensuring the workforce is ready in our sector, because we don't project that our workforce is going to shrink like it will in other sectors as AI really kicks in. It's an imperative element of this. And I'm also not afraid to say I have no idea. I defer to my bosses in the room that are in that work precisely. And I'm sure we'd be happy to provide extra detail after the fact today or now. There are some folks happy to weigh in. But yeah, I think it's a critical piece. There was a national workforce shortage in nonprofits through much of the pandemic. That has wavered a little bit as nonprofits have had to lay folks off across the country. The last data point I saw was something like 27,000 nonprofit employees laid off since January 20. But there are still a lot of organizations in a position to hire. But thinking that long-term piece, there are things we've been doing that are effective, innovative, et cetera, and there are going to be new things we're going to have to do as a sector too. What was your second question?
Well, no, I just want to follow up on that and say, I think it's so important for us as a committee to consider this because you hear a lot about workforce development across all sectors. This is one where I think it's not as sort of visible of an issue, but the unpredictable nature of funding or the 1 year at a time funding causes this turnover, and a lot of examples of that. So again, we have lots of challenges, as Sandy mentioned, for recommendations, but I think that longer term horizon and how are we going to be prepared to handle whatever the needs might be is paramount.
Yeah, thank you. It's been interesting as our members have talked to us about the wage element of that. Our organizations were doing all sorts of interesting things the first couple of years of the pandemic to support the culture within their organizations and help people that are on the front lines of the pandemic. One of our organizations that's here today instituted pet insurance. A lot of organizations moved to 4-day work weeks where that was feasible. A lot of them couldn't, but a lot of them did. There's all sorts of things that are out there that have been tried and will need to be tried to fortify the workforce, because the need isn't going to go down. The workforce is going to have to keep growing just as proportionate as the resources behind it too. Thanks for the question.
Barbara? I want to echo Doug and Sandy's comments of thank you both for your extraordinary service and for being here. Thank you for the research you've given us, and the two big chunks that are coming our way, Michael, I think are going to be really important. So thank you for that. I wanted to follow up on Sandy's first question. I think we all hoped you'd have the magic answer and we could just adjourn the meeting today, Michael. But so she asked more around ideas specifically related to the funding levers. And I really appreciated your comments about the ecosystem of the nonprofit community, how our community had an opportunity to be one of the best in the country. So if you were thinking more systemically about the nonprofit ecosystem, are there programs, solutions, pieces of the puzzle, investments that could be made that would sort of lift the whole in its performance, rather than just the levers and the revenue?
Yeah, great question. So when Columbus and Franklin County received the first tranche of American Rescue Plan Act dollars, we sat down with our board and public policy committee and said, what should the general proposition be as we advocate wanting everyone to get what's going to be available? And we talked about investments in people, programs, and infrastructure in and around nonprofits. And I think that stands as we try to figure out how to bolster the sector to meet the community's needs, thinking of it both reactively, meeting immediate needs, and also helping the community continue to grow and flourish the way that we know that it can. I'm not trying to give you a non-answer, but generally speaking, those are the priorities that make sense. And I think infrastructure investments that can have a ripple effect for a lot of organizations make sense, but I don't think there's one domino that we knock over and that solves everything. There are lots of things. We have to approach it as the complex system with complex needs is trying to meet that they are. We can't just say, well, the one thing will fix it all. And I'm not suggesting that's one of the solutions at the table. There are certain pieces that uniquely are intertwined, but that's the thing with the Health and Human Services ecosystem. It is all intertwined. And I remember we had a meeting with, I can't remember now, back in 2021 when I had black hair. And the question was, how do we prioritize what we've got? And the answer resoundingly was, an investment in some of the sector is an investment in all of it. And a disinvestment in some of it is disinvestment in all of it. So for example, one of the subsectors of health and human services that's under unique duress right now are agencies serving refugees and immigrants, especially refugee resettlement agencies. We have 3 in our community. That doesn't just affect those 3 agencies. That affects a lot of them. We've got a couple members right now that are trying to navigate new requirements that were released through a directive from the federal government last week about the legal status of the people they're serving. That ripple effect is enormous. It affects the workforce of this community and of the sector too. I'm meandering a bit because I haven't had caffeine in 10 minutes, but I think that's generally, there are infrastructure intertwined investments that will make sense and lift everybody, but there isn't a silver bullet.
I'll just leave open the question for advice to the committee at any point, that if you look at best practices in other communities, or you see something that in general could be a leverager or lifter, it would be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Barbara. Hi, Tanny.
And for being here and your leadership, Michael. You've been, and for everyone being here, all your leadership in the community makes it special. I know that you've been traveling, you've been looking at best practices, following up a little bit on Barbara's comment. And I know in your report you said there isn't an organization that's collecting best practices from around the community or around the country.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask it again, are there? And then are we looking at your revenue types, and I know we've been talking here about different revenue sources, whether it was a levy that you discussed or use taxes. We keep also talking about, I see that your philanthropic grants are staying fairly even. Partnerships, you're talking to corporate community as well as the entire community, but has anyone brought up any innovative funding ideas? We talk about corporate bonds, we talk about social impact bonds. Anything out of the box that you're hearing, I just echo Barbara's comment.
Yeah.
Can you bring that forward to us? Because there have to be other communities where all communities are facing this.
Yeah.
How do we think of outside the box, and back to Sandy's comment, that doesn't necessarily have a regressive tax effect that impact the
Yeah.
community we're serving?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Forgive me if I miss any. Just throw something at me and I'll answer the ones I missed. First, I'll reiterate the enthusiasm to fill the hole that exists in collecting data of how communities generate the revenue and then how much they put out through competitive grants alone to nonprofits is there. People want to figure it out. They want to have it. It just doesn't exist. And we've asked everyone that would know. To illustrate the point, I could ask one of our friends in local government or more local government, how much do you route to nonprofits, period, whether through a competitive grant or not? It's hard to get a clear answer. It can be tabulated, of course, because Auditor Kilgore and the equivalent of the county do an excellent job of tracking everything. That was for the Trump administration, in case they're listening. It's difficult to quickly gather that, and it doesn't exist in one place. I know, just from these conversations, there's an eagerness to remedy that because the cities and counties will be the laboratories of figuring this out. To the corporate philanthropy question, we have a lot of one-off conversations with folks in corporate philanthropy. I just found out I'm speaking to a gaggle of them in October, and I look forward to that conversation and the work that will come out of that. We try to be as connected to trends through what we can read and what we can hear. We're part of some national networks, and of course our members send us stuff that they're seeing and hearing about as well. But at present, I haven't heard of a similar unique approach on corporate philanthropy. And I think that's in part because we're all kind of waiting to see when all of this is going to stabilize a little bit so we can figure out how to respond. And we're also trying to understand what will the quantifiable impact be. And too much is still shifting for that, I think. I think one of the things that we can do here with this group, with the city, the county, with philanthropy and others is be in communication regularly as we get more clarity on the impact, and we can identify ways through this to be as responsive as possible. I think that kind of partnership makes a lot of sense. It's something we did early in the pandemic, and I think we're going to have to do it again because the first 7 months of this year have felt like the pandemic for nonprofits. It has been that jarring. People are exhausted. It's not just me with my caffeine. People are exhausted. That's part of the turnover challenge. But that also creates the opportunity to figure it out together. So we look forward to that.
On the data side, I would say, I think part of the challenge is, Michael's graphic showed earlier, it's everything. Like, I can't imagine what the data of the human services sector would be because it would be so much. We have it for subsectors, right? Like, I could give you data on our housing stability work. I could give you data on homelessness. We could do health. We've got workforce development, right? But the whole sector, I think that's where it probably just feels like too amorphous versus drilling down. And even when you think about investments or levies or social impact bonds, they're usually targeted towards a very specific subsector versus just at large. You are targeting that resource for a very specific purpose. And I'm probably the opposite pendulum of Michael not having a favorite child, which is we're going to have to pick what we prioritize, right? And it's going to have to be outlined in that. And that's the unfair space of government, but that's the truth. And so I think that that's part of it, is that it's everything, and that would be a huge document.
Are we just going to go on the show good cop, bad coping
Yes,
things?
always.
Can I add a corollary to what I said too? I'm really mad at myself for forgetting this. So an interesting element in the philanthropic space, no matter the source right now, is fear. People are afraid to run afoul of executive orders, of political priorities, of rhetoric, et cetera. So a lot of the money that had been flowing to diversity, equity, and inclusion work has stopped. And that's affecting a lot of nonprofits disproportionately. It's certainly affecting higher ed, it's affecting corporations, it's affecting law firms. No one is really immune to that, but there's a sliver of the disproportionate impact there. Thanks, Tanny.
I think you know how much the work of your organization and everyone matters in our community. I also wanted to commend this data. I think there's so much community knowledge here, and I think even how people are feeling is instructive of the scale of this problem. You almost talked me out of asking this question a moment ago because of just the complexity and the vastness of this. But I wonder if you could orient us to, let's maybe call it order of magnitude. How many dollars do we need to find as a community to get maybe the 66% of nonprofit leaders that are rating the state of affairs as bad or very bad to maybe go to fair? Or maybe to see the KPIs that would indicate that we're a community where everyone's thriving are consistently increasing. Just order of magnitude.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We've wrestled with that a lot. Are you familiar with what the War Room is? Some of you are on it, or your organizations are. I didn't come up with the name, but the Columbus Partnership under Mr. Polisovsky's leadership had convened a group of folks from the city, the county, MORPC, CODA, Ohio State, Columbus State, a few other entities through the Biden administration to figure out ways to pursue dollars that were available through some of the legislation that had been passing. And when the White House turned, they kindly invited us to try and represent all of the organizations in the health and human services space. And that is the question I get every month. There was a payoff to that rambling piece there, Matt. I think we are trying, and our members are trying, to quantify what the loss might be. It won't be insubstantial, but it is still too unpredictable as to how some of the things are going to pan out to put a precise figure on it. The only thing I feel comfortable saying, and I don't say this lightly, and I don't say it to try and scare us off from acting, every community, every region is going to lose billions of federal dollars across the sectors that are going to lose money as the federal government retreats from its long-term obligations or commitments. How that quantifies specifically to health and human services nonprofits or our friends in local government that route some of those dollars is a very open question right now. And part of it is because the pieces of the legislation that passed in July are going to come later. So we won't know yet, and we don't know what the response will be yet, politically or otherwise. All that said, I think that's what's, this isn't the right word, but promising about this is we have time to act and do the very best that we can without having to solve it all immediately. We have to pace it out because what's happening is a shift in how we fund communities and nonprofits. The infrastructure is shifting, and we have to evolve with it. Because whatever is happening now, whatever happens over the next 3 years, won't go back to the way it was after 2 elections. And I think that's the ominous part of this, but also, again, the promising part that gives us a charge to have local solutions, collaborative solutions, to meet needs. As we get more and more specifics, we will happily share them. But they're so tired of getting surveyed by me of, well, how much, do you know yet? How much the Medicaid cut's going to hit you? Don't know yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Sandy, I have a question. Oh, Trey. Do you mind? Just a quick question. I think we've all talked about the funding. We've talked about mergers. One thing that maybe we could benefit from is your insight relative to efficiencies and adjacencies with some of your member organizations.
Sure.
So can you illustrate by sharing some examples of how your member organizations are finding those efficiencies within their own peer groups?
Yeah. That would be a very long, happy answer, and I'm happy to accumulate a series of them for you from everybody in the room and beyond. The amount of collaboration and problem solving that happens is astonishing to me, and they will forget more than I'll ever know about those kinds of things that they're doing together. Let me tell you something that we're involved in, and Deputy Director Jones mentioned it. We're trying to provide a range of professional services and capacity building work under the leadership of our wonderful Deputy Director, Bhumika Patel. Finding those things and providing them to as many organizations as we can is great, and a lot of organizations do that independently on their own. A lot of them have begun sharing space in a way that they hadn't been previously. A lot of them are sharing technology in a way that they haven't been previously. The forthcoming community information exchange is an example of that a lot of people in this room are invested in one way or another. One of the things that, to me, is the white whale that was the second charge of the Human Service Chamber when it was created was figuring out health insurance for the sector. And when Bhumika started with us a million years ago in 2021, that was her job. I said, figure this out. And it's a very complex challenge, but to me would save, and our members know this because they ask every year, did you figure it out yet? It would save millions and millions of dollars if we could figure that out. That's an opportunity that we haven't identified a solution to yet. A lot of organizations are thinking about affiliations and revenue opportunities in ways they haven't been previously, but now I'm rambling. we'll get you a list of various examples from big, small, medium-sized organizations within subsectors across, if that's beneficial for you to see. I'd be happy to collect that, but they can all talk about that one far better than I can.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I know-
Karen.
I know there's some really phenomenal things going on here, so I thought that might be helpful to lift that up a
Yeah,
little bit.
absolutely. Hi, Trudy.
Hannah, for the great information that you've given to the committee today, as well as representation that you have of various folks in your sector. You have spoken about public dollars.
Yep.
You've talked about philanthropic dollars. You've talked about corporate dollars. What I haven't heard today is what, as an organization, are you all thinking or have you contemplating social enterprise? As you said, it's a changing landscape.
Yeah.
And the funding is not going to be what it was. We had the opportunity to have a plethora of dollars that particularly came from the federal government,
Right.
which is ending because of not only the administration, but because the ARPA dollars are gone.
Right.
So from an organizational standpoint, thinking about the chamber and thinking about also having skin in the game yourself,
Yeah.
what have you all thought about around innovative ideas for social entrepreneurism, maybe as a group or maybe individually as organizations?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Trudy. My staff wants me to start charging people to advise them on careers as the Chamber's social entrepreneurship piece. I've resisted that so far. As a sector, there are lots of organizations within the membership and the community that have stood up and successfully stood up social entrepreneurship models. Goodwill Columbus is an example of that. Furniture Bank is an example of that. A lot of organizations have retail now. We have 4 members that generate revenue from the sale of coffee. To give you a sense of things, a couple weeks ago, I had to email our members, those 4 members, and say, you need to watch this lawsuit by the Orange Juice Growers Association challenging the tariff on Brazil, because that's going to increase the cost of coffee. That's not the kind of work I thought we'd be in, but we have a lot of members in that space for. We have several organizations with some sort of business in food or retail, and we have an organization that does, it's called Ocumetrics at Mental Health America of Ohio, and they do all sorts of wonderful work, and on and on. Again, we can get you a voluminous list of what does exist. That said, just like with the mergers piece, it's going to be one of the arrows in the quiver, as opposed to a substantial revenue stream, certainly on a quick timeline. And I know that a lot of our members have been and will continue contemplating ways in which they can generate revenue. We've got one member that's going to stand up a for-profit entity in some capacity, for example. It's one of the things that folks will have to be thinking about, but it is challenging, and it won't necessarily be the be-all, end-all, but it'll be one of the things that agencies will do. I'm not privy to any active measures to reinvest or reconsider social entrepreneurship ideas. Again, they could answer that for you better than I could in real time. We didn't ask that question among the 1,000 questions we've asked our members since January, but we're happy to pose it and see what folks' thoughts are on that front. Yep, thanks, Trudy.
Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to clarify some of the slides you had here. So on the one, I know the Cohere report is still being finalized.
Yeah.
But there's a figure here of 135 to 162 million, and it spells out a couple of different things, which is really helpful.
Yep.
Do you know, is that absent of restrictive funding? So is that what the kind of delta is, right? So I think about the sector and that there's a baseline.
Yeah.
Of funding, right? TANF, other restrictive dollars. Our county would have a better sense of that, levy dollars, that kind of thing. So is that like the delta that we see of the need, unmet need, if you will, or that unrestricted delta?
What a wonky, wonderful question from Councilmember Bankston. I don't believe that represents the whole delta, but I would happily get clarification from the Cohere folks who were wonderful to work with on that front. They had very thoughtful approach to coming up with those figures, but I don't recall precisely what it was at this time.
Got it.
Happy to get you that answer.
Yeah, and I just level set there because I think that there's the demand is much higher than what our nonprofit sector can bill for, what is out there for the need that is current.
Yeah.
So also speaking about meeting the need, you had one slide that talked about folks feeling as if, I think it's an overwhelming majority, 70-some%, that they don't feel like they can meet the current demand.
Yeah.
Can you say anecdotally, if they had all the resources necessary, would they still be able to meet that demand? And what is driving that? Is it simply resources? Is it just the sheer impact of growth of the city? Is it turnover? Just interested to give a little bit more color there.
Yeah, wonderful question. You could probably get 100 answers from 100 people on that front. I think generally speaking, the reason that demand has gone up so much this year is inflationary pressures continuing and recessionary concerns driving more people to seek support from nonprofits, as well as the exhaustion of ARPA dollars that were going directly or indirectly to people who are now having to turn to organizations for help. I think just the timing of that has been such. It's not just dollars. There are all sorts of reasons why not every nonprofit can serve every single person that comes to them. For example, a lot of organizations that are in somewhere along the spectrum of getting people housed, or that's a benefit to the client that they serve, there isn't enough housing to put people, and that creates lags, that creates delays. In childcare, if an employee doesn't have childcare or something along those lines, that has a ripple effect across a lot of organizations that are serving a particular family. So it's people, it's personnel, it's a workforce challenge, it's a resource challenge in terms of facilities. Sometimes it's more granular than that, but generally speaking, it's a complex array of reasons why most nonprofits can't meet every demand that's coming on them. In fairness, it's not a scientific, sophisticated question that we don't know what was behind the answer that everybody gave on that front. And I'm sure all these folks would be happy to elaborate as to why they answered the question the way that they did.
Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, this last one, the local funding that you had in there, I'm guessing that represents both county and city. As far as representation of funds. Can you speak to any specificity or just anecdotally, when we talk about local, how much of other municipalities are in that number?
Wonderful question.
Because I see that your map is showing that poverty is moving. When we look at people's headquarters, it is, yes, a central concentration in the core of the city, but it seems as if it's now in the periphery. It's in some of our more higher wealth suburbs. How much are they also contributing to this? Because I don't think that this is simply a Columbus or Franklin County crisis that we're in. It's really a regional one.
Yeah.
So if you can give some.
Wonderful question. To wit, we have several organizations in those very suburbs that demographically you would not imagine would have such a need to meet, and they do, absolutely do. Some of the most challenged communities in Franklin County are in the burbs. Of course, our agencies are trying to be responsive and follow those needs where they are and help folks. In terms of the financial stake that other municipalities have had, we did a quick look at grant programs coming out of suburbs, and I think, how many, Lauren, were there, like 6 or 7 suburbs that had some semblance of a grant program that they'd stood up in the last couple of years? I might be overstating it. Nothing that's coming out of the suburbs in terms of competitive grants is proportional to the amount that's coming out of the city of Columbus or Franklin County. But some of them are doing it. I think the most recent one was the city of Gahanna. I had to testify to their city council when the year turned, and they were about to allocate grants to 5 organizations. So I think there's increased interest in suburbia there, but I would be lying to you if I said that we had engaged with all the municipalities in Franklin County on that front, either to sense what their interest or bandwidth might be for stacking hands on this front. But I think I would bark up the same tree as you. There's an opportunity there.
And again, just want to echo my thanks of the colleagues around this committee Many folks have heard me say this, that the sector that you represent is not the amenity of a big city. It is critical to our safety net and critical to our economic stability. So thank you for all the work that you all do.
Okay, thank you to both of you for being here and for sharing your wisdom. At the risk of your members not liking me saying this, I would remind the committee that Michael is here representing a portion of the extensive nonprofit community we actually have in this region. And so that's something for us to keep in mind. It is a very, very, very large sector. To the members, thank you for what you all do. I know it's not easy, and we do appreciate you guys more than you know, including those who are not present today. So if you would share that thanks to your membership, Michael, that would be amazing. And Deputy Director, thank you for being here. So we are going to convene next door. If I can ask the committee to leave, I want to point out one quick thing. We have had with us a very enthusiastic generation of an intern with us this summer, Lindsay Butler, who has quietly behind the scenes done a ton of work for us, for this committee. This is her last meeting. She'll be headed back to her senior year of school. And I pointed out because we know it's a generational issue, and her passion for this is as strong as any of ours around the table. And so thank you for all the work you've done for us this summer. Thank you again. We'll be next door.